Welcome to Inside the Mavs, our NBA Free Agency preview special. Appreciate you joining us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Kevin Gray, Mavs insider for 105.3 The Fan, joined as always by my partner Grant Afseth, Mavs beat writer for Sports Illustrated. Appreciate you joining us on wherever you get your podcast for free, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Make sure you give it a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. You can catch me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. This is our last show before NBA free agency gets started. There's a lot to get to with respect to the Dallas Mavericks. Really appreciate you joining us on YouTube as well at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel as well on YouTube at Grant Afseth. It's got a lot of terrific breakdowns and things that are coming your way, so make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube as well at Grant Afseth. As I bring in my guy Grant, what's going on, man? How we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. At least now, until we get into the whole heat of the free agency frenzy for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be a frenzy, and it's funny. We were talking before we got started with today's show. Had kind of an idea that we're going to jump into some of the names that we're, thinking about and hearing about when it comes to the Mavericks and who they could pursue in free agency here in the next couple of days. Ramona Shelburne of ESPN said, actually, no, I got your show prep for you right here, because she jumped on NBA Today with Malika Andrews. And as you heard in the open, said that Kyrie apparently is going to be taking free agency meetings once free agency begins here in a few days, as we get ready to turn the calendar from June to July. Now, she did preface her statements by saying that the expectation, like we have heard from Adrian Wojnarowski, Shams Charania, and Mark Stein, among others, that the expectation is that Kyrie Irving is going to re-sign with the Dallas Mavericks. But she is the first that I have heard say that Kyrie is, in fact, going to take some meetings before his free agency foray with the Dallas Mavericks. Your just initial reaction to all of this, because we knew, Grant, I think, that this was not going to be easy with Kyrie, and yet now here we are with at least this report from Shelburne about Kyrie taking free agency meetings.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Kyrie being 31 and recently, his last contract, he had a lot of money that went towards, I guess you could say, like, due to sitting out with the coronavirus vaccine situation with the Nets. So I think he's going to be very cognizant about maximizing his earnings. That kind of went into the whole midseason trade element of it as well. He wasn't going to get what he wanted from the Nets when they were at the negotiation table. So he had to protect his bird rights and get his way to the a team that he felt comfortable staying long term with, or at least at the time felt would be a good opportunity to try. You want to be with a team that's willing to go the as far as you want them to go with your next contract, with your bird rights. And I think from that point on, it's been always, I think, more probable that Kyrie would stay with the Mavericks as a result. And then going, even though the 8-12 record when he played, post trade deadline with the Mavs, or post trade with the Mavs, those results kind of, I think, create a national sort of, I guess you could say, like, commentary where it's like, oh, well, they weren't even good. Would he want to stay? The Lakers struggled in the Western Conference Finals. That naturally became could LeBron bring Kyrie to LA? But I think, when, long story short, you look at the board for free agency, if you will, and there's not a lot of great options out there. The Lakers, they want to bring back their, key players. Their messaging has been, favor continuity. A lot of guys like Rui Hachimura, Austin Reeves, D'Angelo Russell, they're free agents. They'll need to be re-signed to kind of run it back. And then you have, just looking around, there's a lot of high payroll teams, like the Clippers, even, for example. Like, it'd be very challenging for them to do sign and trades with this new CBA for really any costly player. And then some other teams as well, like the Miami Heat. They seem to be waiting for Damian Lillard, like a trade.
They might want to keep waiting at that point.
Yeah, we all are waiting. We're right there with you.
That's right,
Pat Riley. We're right there with you, Pat Riley.
That's right.
Sure. Just there's not a lot of great options out there. And then, of course, like the big one is the Phoenix Suns, pulling off the Bradley Beal trade. Not many people probably had that on their bingo board at the start of, the Mavs offseason.
Correct.
There was a lot of speculation at times about, could DeAndre Ayton be a trade chip for the Mavs and a sign and trade for Kyrie to go to Phoenix? And then just in general, they're now that's just a completely unfeasible option. Especially with this new CBA getting going, when the calendar or league year flips. So yeah, it's just like the circumstances before the trade happened for a reason, to protect the bird rights to go to a team where he wanted and felt comfortable to play, multi-year, long-term deal, because he wanted that 4-year deal with the Nets, and he wanted them to basically, I guess, if you will, lack of a better term, not play with his money. I don't want these crazy stipulations on my earnings, so I'm going to go to a team that's going to respect that. Is kind of the idea. So yeah, it's just that period aligned with the Mavs retaining him, and everything that's happened since has kind of aligned as well with that general outcome.
And I guess I'll say this with Kyrie. Look, it would be foolish for him not to take meetings. If there are teams that are available that want to sit down with him, whether it be a San Antonio, a Houston, Orlando, some of these teams that have cap space and may want to pursue Kyrie Irving, that is up to him and his people to decide whether or not they want to do that. Now, as we look at this, of course, the Mavericks can offer him more money and more years than anybody. The Mavericks are hoping that he'll take a little bit of a hometown discount, a little bit, so that they can have full use of their mid-level exception, because if he signs a deal that's around $40 million per season, they'll have full use of that mid-level exception, which, I mean, by all accounts, you would want them to have in order to improve this team around him and Luka, presuming that Kyrie comes back. I guess for me, when it comes to Kyrie and his situation, look, you mentioned this, in his early 30s now, probably his final big payday that he's going to get in the NBA. But at the same time, we have to remember, if there are teams or players that want to force themselves, I should say, to certain teams, let's think about it. Jimmy Butler forced himself to Miami. Bradley Beal, as you mentioned, forced himself to Phoenix. These guys, whether it be the superstars or quote unquote stars, if you will, if you consider Jimmy Butler, just a star, not necessarily in that superstar, category. If there is a team that they want to force themselves to, they'll try to do it. And while the Lakers, the Suns aren't necessarily on the surface team that you could look at and say they have the room to absorb a Kyrie Irving. And then on the flip side of that too is we've heard reported that the Mavericks are not interested in helping Kyrie in any kind of sign and trade situation anyway. And they're basically telling him, look, if you want to go sign somewhere else, okay, that's fine. We're not going to facilitate and help you get there, which to me, I don't know how you would feel about it, Grant. To me, it's just posturing, because you can't tell this player who says he wants to go somewhere else, we're not going to work with you. And then that be something that you would feel good about if you're a Mavericks fan saying, oh, well, why didn't you try to get something for Kyrie Irving in some type of sign and trade? I think that's just more posturing on the front office's point of view, at least for right now. So there's several layers here with all this, but for me is my biggest expectation, my remaining expectation is Kyrie Irving is going to re-sign with the Dallas Mavericks, but it would be smart of him to take meetings to just try to get a better understanding of what his market is, and also create a little bit more leverage point. I'll say, hey, Dallas, look, there's other teams that are talking to me. What are you willing to do to ensure that you give me not only the financial security, but also the kinds of years that I'm looking for and what that could look like? And finally, I'll say this. When you look at the Mavericks and their situation right now, the year that comes to my mind is the year 2026. You say, Kevin, well, what year is that? Let's say Kyrie decides to sign a 3+1. You got 3 years guaranteed, and then you get a player option, which essentially I guess would be a 4th year guarantee, because most players are going to opt into that 4th year. Guess who also has a player option going into the 2026-2027 season? That's right. Luka Doncic has one. So if Kyrie decides I'm going to tie my future to Luka, he could do that by making himself available for a 3+1 type of deal if he decides to do that. So there's just a lot of layers, Grant, here to all of this. But my overwhelming expectation is that Kyrie signs here. But the layers and the pathway that we get to that, is multifaceted given some of the things that are at play here and what the Mavericks are trying to do to protect themselves, while also Kyrie trying to look out for himself in terms of his financial interests and the longevity in which he could possibly see himself as a Dallas Maverick.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think if you just look at how the Mavericks have handled, like, free agency negotiations with their own players, like I think you can take a look at Jalen Brunson last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big example seems to be like this is just like reading of like past history and not like saying this is what's happening today, but it seems like the idea tends to be you go talk to teams, you get your number, and then you come to us and we'll have that discussion. And I think a lot of that tends to sort of rely on, quality intel from the front office itself, like their read of the free agency board, like what's the most probable outcomes. Well, in a sense, if let's say our impending free agent looks like he's going to be boxed in without our help in a sign and trade, then we'll communicate we're not going to help you with a sign and trade. And the difference between like Jalen Brunson's situation and Kyrie's situation this year is he, first of all, makes a lot less than what Kyrie projects to make. So that's a lot easier for a team like New York, who loved Jalen Brunson, to just move the salary necessary to just outright sign him without needing that cooperation. So I think that's where like kind of the foundational sort of like circumstances are important to keep in mind, is that Kyrie would basically need another team that really loves him to open up all that space. You're really, like, in today's day and age, unless you're a rebuilding team, you're really not, or losing a star yourself, and got a lot of flexibility. You're not going to necessarily want to do that for a 31-year-old, like, kind of all-star. That would be outside of your timeline. So I think that's probably where that like confidence comes from the team to say, we're not going to help you in a sign and trade. And then naturally, if you're the player in that situation, like as Kyrie is, you would then have to go, all right, what's my next available options? Well, I need to go talk to teams. Most likely, is my guess, the teams that have the financial standing, like the Houston Rockets or Spurs or whoever of those like spending teams have the availability or the flexibility to pursue him. Whether those teams are interested in prioritizing him early on in free agency or not remains to be seen. It seems like the Rockets kind of had their eyes on younger options to fit their timeline, which goes back to the tricky kind of like navigation of being one of those like high profile, like 30-plus-year-old players that like, is trying to navigate their free agency. So I think just overall, it goes kind of all feeds into the whole like final outcome of returning to the Mavericks, but there may be more like steps along the way because he may need to take his number, go to the Mavs, and they may need to discuss, and then maybe, I don't know if there would be any conversation of like stipulations on like guarantees or anything of that nature, considering how sensitive that probably was with Brooklyn. But, just overall, there's probably like some, not like perfect outcome where it's like, we're going to outright day one throw you this big offer that we're like the max of what we can do. There's probably some room for where, like the steps in between, there has to be some like conversation. And some of that may require talking to another team, getting a number, and then coming back and having that discussion. It's just kind of my guess, just kind of based off how things have kind of operated when like kind of reviewing previous free agencies.
Yeah, the leverage play and negotiations here that are going to be taking place between Kyrie Irving and the Dallas Mavericks are going to be very delicate, given what the Mavericks are trying to do, which again is have full use of their mid-level exception. Kyrie on his end looking for as much financial security and long-term security as possible in terms of his years, but also ensuring that based on what he is getting, he can still help this team. And I think for Nico Harrison in this front office, being able to communicate to him and say, look, Kyrie, we want you back here. We believe in you. We celebrate you. We're not just tolerating you. We want this to be your long-term home for the rest of your career, this, that, and the third. But at the same time, we've got to find a way to improve this team. And the best way for us to do that is for you not to take the full max, to be able to give us some flexibility in terms of the salary that we give you. So that opens up some things for us to be able to improve this team. And I think that is going to be the route, at least in my mind, in my opinion, on how this is going to go down. Because if that doesn't go down that way and you're giving Kyrie the near $47 million that he's looking for, you're not going to have use of some of the tools that he needs, him and Luka need, to be able to improve this team. So all this to be said is this was never going to be easy. This was always going to be something where a bump in the road, a hiccup in the road was going to come in at some point. And I think this is for Kyrie, however this is getting out based on what Shelburne is reporting here, that this is yet another negotiation tactic and leverage play to maybe try to extract as much as he can based on what the Mavericks are attempting to do for him and his contract moving forward here. But obviously all that remains to be seen going forward here for Kyrie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another aspect to kind of take into consideration with, I guess, some of the flexibility with potential like compensation on a deal has to do with the fact that Kyrie earlier, like as we discussed when the LeBron James recruitment story came out, is that clearly, you know, Kyrie wanted to show his value as a recruiter. And it's kind of hard to be, I guess you could say, like an elite or world-class recruiter if you don't have the tools in your arsenal, if you will, to go out and make the recruiting effort. Like I feel, you know, if he kind of has names in mind and there's feasible options, it's a lot easier to have that full non-tax MLE. And if you're, you know, Kyrie 31 wanting to win like at a high level, you probably want to have that chip to be able to help the organization bring someone that's a difference maker. Because at the end of the day, they added, you know, some raw offensive rookies that, you know, like to play defense, but at the end of the day, it's like they're not going to step in and be huge impact players by any stretch, and they'll have to, you know, earn what they get. There's a lot of unproven element to it, so there's going to be more need to fill out the rotation with veteran, you know, talent upgrades, considering the team didn't even qualify for the play-in tournament just a season ago. And you want to have everything at your disposal to fill one of those or two rotation spots in a sense, because if there's a player that can play multiple positions using that tax MLE, like a Bruce Brown, or non-tax MLE, I should say, like the Nuggets were able to use, I guess, well, Nuggets use their tax MLE, I should say. But like if you're getting a player like a Bruce Brown using your non-tax MLE, just as an example, who plays multiple spots, that really helps you in the playoffs because you can shorten your rotation even further. And then that makes it easier to say, all right, well, these rookies really aren't ready for playoff basketball. So we're just going to, you know, rock with Bruce Brown for heavy minutes or whatever player you want to use as that example. But I think that's definitely a key part of it as well, is just, you know, the whole recruitment factor, because it's hard to use like biannual exception, veteran minimum money to you know, hit up, you know, someone, one of your NBA peers and be like, oh, you want to come with me to Dallas? Well, all we really got is the vet minimum. It's like that's probably not going to work too much for too many people. So that's another element. Like if he wants to maximize his recruiting potential, you know, not only just for the team, but for his own sake of winning and competing, then you know, preserving that tax or non-tax MLE, I should say. I'm so used to saying tax MLE because where we were working with information about like a month ago, it was all tax MLE, 2 years, 10 million. So yeah, just the recruiting angle is something to definitely watch. You know, just beyond his own contract, because you know they still need a starting center, surely, and you know whatever else can be upgraded with the roster as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well.
Well, that gets us to our portion of our program where the Mavericks are getting ready for free agency and some of the tools that they have available to them to be able to do it. We will run through, including some of the players who we think could fit some of these needs. We talk about the needs for this Mavericks team. Grant started to mention it. A starting center is needed. Yes, they drafted Derek Lively, who's a guy that you could see down the road as a potential starter as he continues to grow and learn the game himself. Drafting Olivier Maxence Prosper, a 6'8" guy that can be a 3-and-D type of wing potential going forward as well. But they have immediate needs now that they've got to begin to take care of. One of those needs, or I should say a housekeeping item for them as we record this, Reggie Bullock's $10.5 million salary for the upcoming season became guaranteed as of June the 28th. So he is in the fold now, at least for going into the rest of the offseason into next year. He's an expiring contract on the final year of his 3-year deal that he signed with the Mavericks a few years ago. So there's an expiring contract that could be utilized as well for the Mavericks, whether it be in trade talks now or by the time they get to the beginning of the season or into the trade deadline. But let's think about some of the things that they have available to them in terms of keys or tools, I should say, available for the Mavericks. It's coming from Bobby Marks of ESPN, who has all of his offseason things for each of the 30 NBA teams. And for the Mavericks, they've got a $12.4 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception they can use. They've got a $4.5 million biannual exception that they have available to them. They still got the rest of that $17 million trade exception that they created with moving Davis Bertans to the Oklahoma City Thunder and getting Rashawn Holmes. They have about $3.2 million left of that they can still use. And then obviously the veteran minimum contracts that they would be able to utilize to bring in and fill out the rest of this roster. So right now, as it currently stands, $52 million below the luxury tax, $59 million below the $172 million first apron. Now, again, all of this kind of changes when you get Kyrie Irving back into the fold, which is why it's so important for the Mavericks to be able to find a way to maybe not sign him to that full $46-47 million a year that he's looking for, maybe get him around 40 so you can have full use of that mid-level exception. As we start thinking about names, we obviously heard reporting, Grant, that the Dallas Mavericks and the Phoenix Suns had engaged in trade talks to possibly acquire DeAndre Ayton to be able to bring him here with a combination of JaVale McGee, Tim Hardaway Jr., Rashawn Holmes going back to the Phoenix Suns. What are some names for you that you are hearing circulating that the Mavericks could be in play for, given some of the tools that they have available to them to be able to utilize? Again, assuming that Kyrie is back and for this conversation is not signed at that $46-47 million or gets them full use of that non-taxpayer mid-level exception there for $12.4 million. Yeah.
In terms of potential targets, for the Mavs, I think some of the main names that have kind of been put out there so far in terms of a wish list, obviously like the Harrison Barnes, Bruce Browns, but in terms of like the realistic, path to those players, I think Harrison Barnes will probably make too much money. When reporting gets put out about landing spots, I always like to ask people that I know to see check up on like what's going on out there. And kind of my thought with Harrison Barnes that they're asking around with some people is just that the Indiana Pacers are probably the most realistic landing spot for him outside of the Kings if he was to leave the Kings. I think he's probably going to, numbers will be too high for the Mavericks with their, with their non-tax MLE. And then in terms of Bruce Brown, there's going to be so much interest in him. Like I'm sure just about any NBA team would love to have a guy that contributed with a lot of versatility to a title run.
Apparently the Lakers are reportedly interested in the services of Bruce Brown, according to the Denver Post. So there's that there.
Yeah, so it's going to be very challenging. And then when you just look at like the need to add a center, Brook Lopez is a name that's been out there linked to like the Rockets in terms of, potential interest to get a bigger contract. But it sounds more likely that he'll, return to Milwaukee than do that. But I think like in terms of other options, it's very limited for centers that are out there. As we talked about, DeAndre Ayton was brought up again in like kind of that trade speculation or rumors about recent talks. That's kind of a challenging, trade to kind of get done, in my opinion, because, as we talked about, just off the show, Rashawn Holmes, that's not necessarily an appealing player for the Suns to take on. And then you also are going to have to probably ask them to take on, Tim Hardaway or JaVale if you're ideally doing your perfect trade.
It sounds like they don't want to take on JaVale McGee in that case.
Yeah,
they've been there, done that.
They don't want that. They don't want
right.
Holmes. And in a sense, when you look at their roster, they have a lot of combo guards that they don't need to add. Like I'm not running Suns basketball operations, but my whole guess is that Tim Hardaway does not check the boxes of what they need to fill out their roster with. So that I think unless you're willing to part with like the 2027 first round pick, the only eligible for future draft asset that they can actually move this summer. Like I don't think there's really like too much that's enticing for Phoenix. And even then, they're in like a win now mode. It's always good to have like a liquid asset that you can throw into other trades. But I mean, a 2027 first round pick may not do a whole lot for you if you're literally trying to win like tomorrow, if you're the Suns.
Yeah.
So overall, I think there'll have to be some creativity. I think the current names that have been linked, I think Grant Williams, I forgot to get to him, but that's going to be another challenging one. The Celtics can match any offer sheet. You know, they can engage in a sign and trade, but you're going to have to part with value for him as well. And, you know, he'd be a helpful player, you know, at the 4 spot, has some versatility, but you're going to have to move off of a trade chip that you need, you know, for other trades. You know, you still need the center position if you're the Mavericks. And you probably would ideally add another wing as well overall. So that is that like the best option to not only deplete your non-tax MLE and a trade asset? I don't know. Like I guess that's all. Speaking of basketball operations and not having that job, that's why I don't run the Mavericks. But yeah, just like looking at just different names, it's like there's not a lot of great like, you know, like, oh yeah, that would immediately jump out and make them a fantastic like team, fill all the holes. Like there's not really like a great like center option or wings, because everyone wants a wing, everyone wants a rim protector. So I think there'll have to be some creativity with those contracts that we mentioned earlier. Like, you know, Reggie Bullock's expiring deal. Like, are you comfortable now with, you know, embracing Josh Green in that like full-time starter role? They're not really like compatible in a sense to necessarily have one of them play the 4, because you know they're both too small for that. So is now the time to use that expiring deal in a trade to kind of fill one of those spots? Tim Hardaway, you know, like I've seen some conversation that like, or commentary, if you will, on his value, and you know he's still a very good, you know, 3-point shooter, one of the higher volume makers, and you know like highly efficient as well. So teams surely would like to add him if they're in a need for shooting, but then that also gets you in a very specific situation where it's like, what team would want Tim Hardaway and also have, like, they're probably not going to part with a wing to get Tim Hardaway, that, or at least a wing that makes you better. And would it be a team that has a center that wants to move their center for Tim Hardaway? It's like, it gets very complicated. So I think like right now it's very unclear what they can do. And it should be unclear considering they're not allowed to legally have these conversations.
Correct.
So it should be unclear. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they get creative. I think they'll probably have to even get to some veteran minimum options to fill out the end of the roster as well. And you know, that always requires creativity. But yeah, I think overall, just that first domino will be the non-tax MLE. If they, you know, obviously they preserve it, which it seems like they, you know, that's the plan going into the free agency. But yeah, you got to check one of those boxes. Either you got to get the big, or you got to get the wing, or even fill the 4 spot. I mean, I'm starting to add a lot of needs.
I mean, there are a lot of needs for this Mavs team. There are a lot of needs. I mean, look, for me, I have been on the train of building from the inside out. And obviously with their continued talks that we've heard reported with the Phoenix Suns about DeAndre Ayton, obviously spending a first-round draft pick on a center, they clearly believe that they have got to upgrade the center position. And we've heard reported from Mark Stein detailing how they want to overhaul the center rotation that they have. So whether or not they bring back Dwight Powell, you know, on a veteran minimum deal of some sort, obviously Christian Wood is not going to be back with his team, it appears. JaVale McGee is still trying to figure out how he looks in this rotation or whether or not you can move on from him. It is clearly evident this team wants to upgrade their center position. This is just my own humble opinion. I don't think necessarily the whole DeAndre Ayton thing is dead in my mind, because if they can find a way to get something, how willing is Phoenix trying to move off of DeAndre Ayton? Because clearly I believe they're still trying to move off of him. I know they said that they want to, you know, commit to him and they want to do that. To me, I'm getting the feeling that they still want to move off of DeAndre Ayton and are trying to find a package that is worth the while for them, because they're not going to get commensurate value based on what they're paying him to bring or to move him out of Phoenix. So the Mavericks may still have something there, but they, for me, have got to build from the inside out with a rim protector, a guy that can play alongside Luka, because regardless of whether or not Kyrie is there or not, Luka Doncic remains the focal point of this team, and they have got to find a rim protector and a center who offensively can still do the things that allows Luka to be the kind of offensive dynamo with that combination that they have right now. And obviously, moving forward, how you fill that out, maybe a Taurean Prince, maybe you can try to find some guys that can build you some value that can also help you out on the wings. Because look, I feel for Grant Williams, probably going to find something that gets matched by the Boston Celtics. Celtics seem motivated to keep him. Obviously, they traded for Kristaps Porzingis. Grant Williams seems like a guy that's going to be remaining there as well. Bruce Brown, I think, is a pipe dream. I would love to see a Bruce Brown in a Dallas Maverick uniform, but at the same time, the Nuggets can offer him only $7.8 million this upcoming year. The Lakers, depending on what they decide to do with Mo Bamba, Malik Beasley, they could have some wiggle room to try to make something happen with Bruce Brown there. But he's going to have a lot of suitors for his services this offseason as well. So I think the big prize for the Mavericks is finding a quality center and then filling out the rest of this roster with serviceable, good players that allow them to be able to have at least better wing defense from the 3 and D spots and be able to move on from there. But they've got to find that true centerpiece in the middle now to be able to move forward and then build out the roster from the rest from there, at least in my mind, in that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because I think, when you rank dead last in total rebounding percentage as a team and 25th in defensive rating, like that's a very rough outcome. And, just looking beyond the numbers, you look at even the offense. Like, I know they're a high powered offense when they're clicking, but that big that they have gets put into the short roll a lot. And you can't have like just, reluctant players that are like looking to just throw the ball away and panic whenever they're in that short roll spot. I got into some Twitter spats early in the season about that because some people wanted to kind of like minimize those sequences to like, oh, well, you just make the right basketball play. You just shoot threes. Well, I mean, like, to my understanding, you can attack short rolls in like a lot of different ways. And like, if you
that's
have
what makes Bam Adebayo so good.
yeah. And then you got teams that also have like athletic cutters that will like cut out of the corner, 45 cut from the wing. And, like you can counter defenses that are like, beating the big on the catch. Also, all kinds of things. And I guess, honestly, that might be a byproduct of just like the supporting cast that the Mavericks have built, where sometimes it may not feel like those sequences are possible as a team. Like a lot of one-dimensional, non-dynamic, if you will, players. And I think that's another aspect of it too. So like, there's so many ways for like a defense to kind of like bog down, how you're attacking them. And that's definitely one way to get the ball out of the superstar's hands, put them in the short roll, and then that player has to be a threat, but then also they need to have wings that are around the 5 that can attack closeouts and be also very like willing to take contested threes. Because if you got the wings that are turning down shots and a big that's not a scoring threat or a quick processor on the catch, then you're in a tough spot. Then you have Luka Doncic passing the ball out and Kyrie Irving watching kind of a meltdown a little bit. And I think that's partly why you need that big that can be a threat offensively, because you can start to use more sets. Like, late after the trade, it felt like the Mavericks, like especially when they play big lineups, they were starting to utilize more like horn sets and just putting the ball in the big's hands to be a playmaker a little bit more. And I think that kind of activates everyone in the unit and kind of negates some of those, like, I guess, one-dimensional like limitations that you encounter. So I think all those things need to be factored into roster construction, because in the playoffs, like I know you got to get to the playoffs first. That's where we're operating from right now, is getting to the playoffs if you're the Mavs. You got to account for solving for what teams will do, and all those things that I just mentioned. Those are going to be important to solve for in those settings in the playoffs. And so there's a lot of different aspects to the roster that might need to be reconfigured. And I think as you said, it does start with that big, because you got to be a threat on that catch, and just in general, another option to dump the ball to, even on switches, because that's another factor that kind of was a struggle for the Mavericks. Aside from Christian Wood, you didn't necessarily have, like in the offense last year, you didn't necessarily have a threat that you just dump the ball down to and trust.
Sure.
You don't want to play like bogged down post up basketball. But I mean, even with Christian Wood, there were times where, when he was playing with the bench unit, where Spencer Dinwiddie before the trade, it seems like ancient history.
I know, right?
He would kind of reject the entry pass. He would get kind of pushed off his spot, and then it would kind of bog down a play, and they would kind of like even like just abort out of the attacking the switch. So overall, it's just like, even when they had it, it wasn't necessarily the most utilized or great option in general. And that's going to have to be solved for. And then everything around it as well. You got to have versatility in today's NBA. You can't just have specialists that want to take open threes. You got to have aggressive closeout attacking threats, tough shot makers, all that stuff. So, yeah, a lot of work and development as well. Like, not to get too deep into it, obviously, because we're talking about free agency, but Josh Green's development becomes a factor in there as well. Yep. How more aggressively will defenses be to close out on him next season after he had a full season of quality 3-point percentage? Will he be reluctant to take those threes that are more contested? How much can you play Jaden Hardy alongside Kyrie and Luka? There were times where they shared the floor, very limited times, but like, how comfortable would you be doing that? That's not something that needs to be factored in as well. So there's a lot of like roster configuration with the vets, player development, like confidence levels are important. And then as we just said with the rookies, how eager are you to throw them out there? How raw do they look early on offensively? A lot of things to sort out. And not a lot of time to figure it out before free agency really gets underway for sure.
A couple names that I'll mention that could make some sense for the Mavericks given their situation that they're dealing with. Obviously, a Torrey Craig, most recently with the Phoenix Suns. This will be a little bit of a pipe dream. A Max Strus, who played extremely well for the Miami Heat during the NBA playoffs.
But remember, he said you got to always remember Max Strus. He said in the past it would be very difficult, or not very. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he said one of the most difficult players to play with would be Luka Doncic.
That's true.
Because he doesn't move the ball. So I just have to throw that one out there. Who knows? He might be reluctant.
I'm sure his tune would change if the Mavericks were able to offer him the kind of mid-level exception that could be available to them to bring him in. And look, I'm not necessarily a guy that would be in favor of this, but another name that could make some sense, especially if you're looking for some defensive toughness, some nastiness. I mean, Dillon Brooks is out there and available. I mean, the Rockets could money whip him and bring him in there. But obviously, Dillon Brooks is a guy who was second team All-NBA defense this past season, is a guy that could be there as well. I know some of the antics and some of the things that went on in Memphis were there. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily in favor of bringing him in here, but if
option one, not on the top of the Kevin Gray wish list.
No. But if the Mavericks believe that their locker room can absorb his personality, then maybe that's something that they could feel comfortable with in bringing him in. And again, a guy who would instantly, if nothing else, would instantly improve the perimeter defense of the Dallas Mavericks with his abilities to be able to guard on the perimeter. So just another name, but those are the kinds of names that you got to kind of start thinking about given the financial situation that they're in, but also the dominoes and how they begin to fall once Kyrie Irving signs, because until Kyrie Irving kind of makes his decision, which is why time is kind of the essence to hopefully get this thing wrapped up as quickly as possible if you believe Kyrie Irving is coming back, because if you can, then that keeps you in play for some of these names that could fit, your financial situation that the Mavericks currently have right now.
Yeah, and I think even with the trade market as well too, because there's a big factor of it. Like even like Atlanta Hawks are kind of a team that a lot of other teams are watching.
DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah, exactly. DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella are two names that are still available of those names that were listed as potential, salary, dump options, or just, payroll alleviation, casualties, if you will. John Collins obviously got dumped to Utah. They had the space to absorb him. And that was pretty much just pure salary dump.
Pure
Dallas,
salary dump. Yes.
yeah, Dallas would have to have more salary, going back to Atlanta or a third team or get creative with it. But players like that, like with the new CBA calendar year flipping, like a lot of teams want to get off of their money and like just move things around. So you got to probably be pretty urgent with what the big picture plan is to capitalize on those sort of trade targets. Before another team gets a deal done, or just the option in general, the shifts, and there's not too much out there. But I think right now it's interesting. There's not too many great center options, and then talking about that spot, and then just in general, do you want to part with a future first round pick if you just used a lottery pick to draft a center? That's another complication that kind of gets thrown in there. And then what wings are out there that you can necessarily acquire that make a big difference for you with a first round pick, 2027 pick attached to one of the contracts they would have to move? Because I think right now, just looking at how the draft night trade talks kind of, the information that comes out from that, there was reluctance to move young players like Josh Green or Jaden Hardy. So that's probably, I would imagine, going to continue to be, I guess you could say, like, not eager or off the board. I hate the word untouchable, because like there's really like anyone, like heck, even one of us could get traded. Like anyone besides like Luka Doncic or whatever is like
correct
in the NBA. Like there's like very few true untouchables. But the idea,
I feel safe in putting Luka in that category.
Yeah, a little bit. He might be all right. He might be able to not worry about that one. But yeah, overall, just like they don't want to throw young players into the trade mix, especially when you just describe our exciting young core. Jason Kidd described them as being so that kind of limits the trade kind of options, if you will, for what you could send out. But everything changes so fast in the NBA. If there's a big name that has a contract coming up that really just wants to go, like I don't know who would want to necessarily force their way. I'm not saying for reasons like you shouldn't want to go to Dallas if you're a player, but just like I don't necessarily see on the board a wing that's just such a big difference maker. That's like, I got to get to Dallas and I want to make
Pascal
it happen.
Siakam, force your way to Dallas. OG Anunoby, force your way to Dallas. How about that?
Like if someone like that was like, I have to get to Dallas. Like we have the opposite right now. Like Pascal Siakam, there's reporting about how he's like actually like, I don't know how accurate it is. I'm assuming it's accurate. Is kind of deterring trades from happening. Like I'm not going to resign with whoever trades for me because I want to stay in Toronto. And then OG Anunoby, he just switched representation to CAA from Clutch. Some people like to link every CAA client to the New York Knicks. But I mean, I like that fit basketball wise a lot. So I mean, like that's
Tibbs loves his defensive guys. Yeah,
that's probably where the priority would lie if you're competing around the league to trade for someone like that. Like I would imagine New York would probably be a more readily available option with their trade assets, the market, all that stuff. And the ties with the front office and the agencies to get it done. So I think that's the challenging thing when you kind of like think of like what could the Mavericks do if you're kind of simulating an off season. It's not just about your perspective. You got to compete with 29 other teams, and it gets very challenging when your assets are 2027 first. And you don't want to move your young players necessarily, and the contracts you have at your disposal aren't the greatest values to other teams, if you will. So definitely will be interesting to see how creative they get. They sure did get creative on draft night.
They did.
They deserve a lot of credit for that. A lot of people that I talked to just in general were very impressed with moving down, getting your guy, moving off Bertans, and then getting back into the draft as well. Because before it all started, there was some thought like, oh, maybe they trade out of the draft altogether. Like that was a big shift to get the guy that they wanted to move down 2 spots and come away with another prospect as well. So see what they got for us over the next couple of weeks for sure.
Yeah, the trade market is going to be volatile in the NBA with respect to all of these teams trying to get their books in order. The new CBA is official now. It's out for all 30 teams to be able to start to pour through all 676 pages of it. CJ McCollum, really appreciate that.
I feel bad for the people that are employed that have to like now sift through that like 48. What are we? 48 hours, whatever.
Yeah.
How many hours? 2 days.
Yeah.
They're like get all your Monster Energies, your whatever you need. Oh my gosh, I feel bad for them.
Shout out to Andrew Baker, the capologist for the Dallas Mavericks. Good luck with that.
That's why
Over
you
the
make
next
the
couple
big
of
bucks, Andrew Baker.
That's right. That's right. So a lot to get to over the next couple of days, but that just gives you an idea from our perspective what the Mavericks could be looking at. As we mentioned, the trade market's going to be huge as well for this team to try and get creative. Like I said, the whole DeAndre Ayton thing, continue to watch out for that, as well as the Mavericks try to make their way and traverse through this free agency period. It's all starting with, though, Kyrie Irving getting back into the fold. We'll see what happens with that over the next few days. Grant, tell the folks where they can find you, the work that you're doing as we get prepped and ready for this wild free agency period for the Dallas Mavericks here.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to be doing a lot of write-ups on the credible information that kind of comes out about the Mavericks with free agency, trade rumors, all that stuff on DallasBasketball.com. I promise I still am gonna have film breakdowns of those rookies, but when Kyrie Irving's free agency kind of comes up, gets a little hard to prioritize watching ACC basketball. So before Summer League gets going, I promise I'll have those. So that's another thing to look forward to. But regardless of what moves happen as well, I'll break down the roster fit, all that stuff after any move takes place as well, for sure.
And we'll be all over right here on Inside the Mavs. Any news that breaks, we'll be able to get it to you, discuss it, give you our perspectives and breakdowns of it as this free agency period gets underway here in the next couple of days. The Dallas Mavericks are going to be at the center of it with Kyrie Irving, one of the biggest free agents available in this year's class, and what that means for the rest of the NBA and the dominoes that could fall as a result of Kyrie Irving either staying or leaving the Dallas Mavericks and how they move from there. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. I'll be dropping my